Hello everyone, in this video we'll be discussing the renal calyces, pelvis and the ureter. Now as you all know, the kidney is divided into two major regions, the renal cortex and the renal medulla. So over here in the outermost covering, which is the renal capsule, below the renal capsule we have the renal cortex, and then below that we have the renal medulla. Now the renal cortex extends into the medulla as renal columns, which basically divides the medulla into renal pyramids. So these are the renal pyramids, and in between them you have the renal columns. Now at the apex of these renal pyramids, there's a region which is called the renal papilla. Now what are the renal calyces? Now it's the upper part of the urinary tract which collects the urine from the kidney and directs it to the ureters. Now there are three important parts to it. So there's a minor calyx, there is a major calyx, and then there's a renal pelvis. Now the minor calyx is the one that encircles the renal papilla, and the major calyx is formed by the fusion of 2 to 3 minor calyces. Now the renal pelvis is a flattened funnel-shaped expansion at the start of the ureter, and it's basically formed by the fusion of the major calyces. It is responsible for draining the urine into the ureters. Now, what are the ureters? Now, as we all know, they are two thick muscular tubes which are about 25 centimeters long, and it transports the urine from the renal pelvis all the way to the urinary bladder. And these are also retroperitoneum. Now, there are three important parts of the ureter: the abdominal part, the pelvic part, and the intramural part. Now, the abdominal part. Now, it courses in the retroperitoneal space along the anterior surface of the psoas major muscle. At the sacroiliac joint, it crosses the pelvic brim, entering the pelvic cavity. Now, in the pelvic part, it courses in the lesser pelvis down the lateral pelvic wall at the level of the ischial spine. They turn anteromedially, moving in a transverse plane towards the bladder. And the intramural part, it passes through the wall of the urinary bladder. Now, there are three important ureteric junctions or constrictions that we must remember. So there are three. So the first one is over here. It's basically when the renal pelvis narrows to form the ureter, right? And this is the ureteropelvic junction. Now the second constriction is over here. It's basically at the sacroiliac joint. It's basically when the ureters cross the pelvic brim, entering the pelvic cavity. It's basically when they cross at the bifurcation of the common iliac artery. Now the third constriction is over here. It's basically when the ureters enter the urinary bladder in an oblique manner, creating a one-way valve. And also high intramural pressure will collapse the ureters. Now let's talk about the vasculature of the ureters. Now the abdominal portion is supplied by the branches from the renal arteries, abdominal aorta, and the common iliac arteries, whereas the pelvic portion is supplied by the branches coming from the superior vesical artery, middle rectal artery, uterine and the vaginal arteries in the case of females, and the inferior vesical artery in the case of males. The veins follow the arteries in the same way and drain into the renal and the testicular or the ovarian veins. The nervous supply is via the renal and the testicular or the ovarian and the hypogastric plexuses, whereas the sensory fibers enter at T11 to L2 levels. That's it for this topic. Thank you.